How's it going, aliens? My name's iALiEN. Today I'm back on another Identity 5 video, and today's video is the long-awaited Survivor tier list for Season 9. The last time I did a Survivor tier list was in Season 7, so it's definitely in need of a refresh. I recently did my Hunter tier list for Season 9 a couple of weeks ago, so go check that out if you want to see the Hunter side of things. Let's get right into the video. Okay, before I get into the tier list, I do want to plug my Discord server. The link will be in the pinned comment below, as well as in the description below. It's the best place to ask me questions and talk to me more directly, so go click the link and join the server today. Now let's go over the rules of the tier list. There are 5 tiers: C tier, B tier, A minus tier, A plus tier, and S tier. There are so many survivors in this game right now that simply A, B, C doesn't really work because there's just too many characters, and there's a lot more viable survivors than there used to be. So instead of adding tiers at the lower tiers like C and B, it makes a lot more sense to add tiers at A tier because there's so many more viable survivors, and there's only really a few bad, quote-unquote bad survivors in the game. Most survivors are pretty good right now, so that's why I have A plus and A minus. Now let's start off with the lowest tier, and that is C tier. And the worst survivor, actually the best survivor in the game, he's just at C tier for fun, is Lawyer. Lawyer is in C tier because he's never received a buff. He's not that good. He's not good at kiting, and he really serves no purpose. His map is useless for anyone that's not a beginner. No one co-op decode, so his co-op decoding buff is useless, and his other buffs are so small they don't make a difference, like the rocket share persistence. So Lawyer is just not that good as a survivor unless you are new to the game and need to know how to get around the maps. Next in C tier is Lucky Guy. Lucky Guy is not a bad survivor by any means, but he's also not a great survivor. He's a jack of all trades, but as I always say, this game is very role based. So rescue, kiter, support, decoder, you have each character. There are 4 players. Each character can have a specific role. There is no need to use a character that can fill every single role because Lucky Guy doesn't do it as well as if you just played the actual character. So if you play Lucky Guy and get a flare gun to be a rescuer, he's not as good as just playing coordinator because the flare gun lasts for a shorter amount of time, and he doesn't have the rocket share persistence buff that coordinator has. If you play Lucky Guy and get a doll to be like mechanic, a decoder, the doll doesn't have, you cannot control the doll when you are incapacitated or in rocket share, and that's the best part of mechanic. Plus you don't have the built-in decoding buff mechanic has. So, and especially with the nerfs to chest recently that give you less, that really hurt Lucky Guy because you only get 1 elbow pad, 1 perfume. Before it kind of made sense at times to use him, but with the nerf to chest, it really doesn't make any sense to use Lucky Guy anymore because the chests are just not really that useful at all. Lastly in C tier is Explorer. Explorer is a decoder, but he doesn't do a great job at it. The difference in decoding you get from picking up the codes and using it over just decoding is not big enough to make him worth it because he's such an easy target to kill, and because he has nothing to help his kiting, which makes him an easy target to kill. And when you pick up a code, it gives the hunter a notification, so the hunter can go right to you and get a quick 20 to 30 second down, and he doesn't have any other use. So Explorer overall is not that good of a survivor at all. He does hard counter Photographer and Geisha, So against those two hunters, he's actually decent, because against photo, you pick up the codes while the photo is going on, and then when the photo ends, you just use the codes to decode a cipher machine, and none of your progress gets taken back. Against Geisha, all you have to do is shrink down, and Geisha cannot dash on you, so it's basically a skill check button, but your camera doesn't change and make it hard to see and make you walk in the other direction. It's just an easier skill check button. So Explorer is pretty good against those two hunters, but besides that, he doesn't really have any place in the meta. The next tier is B tier. These survivors are viable. You won't see them in high tier play really much at all, because there are so many better options than them. And these are very niche survivors, so they are good in certain maps or against certain hunters, but against the majority of hunters and the majority of maps, they probably aren't so good. Or there's a survivor that does what they do better. First in B tier is the Mind's Eye. The Mind's Eye is too easy to kill. Her decoding buff is nice, but Cypher Rush has not been the meta of this game for a very long time now. Ever since around Season 3 to Season 4, the game shifted from a Cypher Rush meta to a stalling time meta and a blocking meta. So that's why you see team comps with 4 rescuers, with super slow decoding, but it's one of the best team comps because it's all about wasting time. It's not really about how fast you can decode. So Mind's Eye has not fit into the meta for a long time now because of her debuffs, and the recent buff to her really didn't make a difference at all. So for the time being, Mind's Eye is still a pretty weak survivor, but she's just very difficult to play. It's very difficult to kite, bloody queens and feasters and spiders with a hunter that vaults that slow. And in my opinion, the biggest part about her debuff is how slow she puts down pallets, which lets you get hit through them so easily. So Mind's Eye right now is not really that good of a survivor, but she's not terrible either, which is why she is in B tier. Next in B tier is Doctor. Doctor is a support survivor. Doctor, when she first got buffed, that made her a pretty good survivor, but the hunters she counters have been falling out of the meta, and there have been more strategies to beat those hunters. So Doctor is very good against Photographer, and she is very good against Mad Eyes. She is a soft counter to Dream Witch, so she's decent against Dream Witch, and she doesn't really spider and Bon. Technically, they have 0.5 damage, but it doesn't matter. So really, Photo and Mad Eye, she hard counters, and she is still great against those two hunters, but against every other hunter, she's just an easy target, and the healing speed doesn't really make too much of a difference. So that's why Doctor is in B tier, because against certain hunters, she is still a good survivor, but against most hunters, she is not. And Barmaid, who you will see later in this tier list, is basically Doctor, but better in every way, and basically what Doctor should have been, but is Barmaid. And I do believe Doctor is receiving a buff. I think the developer said she is getting a buff. Next in B tier is Thief. Thief recently received a buff to his flashlight and to his kiting. So the buff made it to where he always fast vaults, but it took away his 15% vaulting buff, but made it to where he will never slow vault. His other buff made it to where his flashlight, once you did half of the flashlight, it worked as basically the red ball for Acrobat, so that the hunter's skills are unable to be used for a short period of time. And then of course he still has the regular stun. The problem with Thief is this can kind of seem good in theory, being able to take away Hunter's skills easily, and then always fast vaulting. But the issue is Thief gets countered by too many Hunters. The flashlight really doesn't make a difference against most Hunters, because let's say you're facing a Feaster and you want to stop him from being able to use tentacles, so you're trying to flashlight him. Feaster, all he has to do is just hold the attack and he can hit you because his attack range is long enough. Same goes for Wu Chang. He can hold his attack and he will hit you. Ripper, he can just Foggy Blade you while you're trying to stun him. Bloody Queen, she has a built-in counter because she can just hold her mirror like it's teleport and moonwalk the thief and never get stunned. Geishas will usually bring teleport, so you just moonwalk with teleport. Spider is way too fast. If she's on her webs, you are not going to stun her. You're just going to get hit because she is way too fast. Clown, it just depends on how much distance you had against Clown, on whether you can stop the dash or not. But I think you get my point. And against Dream Witch, it's actually useless. It doesn't do anything to her. So I think you get my point by now why Thief is not that good. It's not because himself is not good. It's mainly because there are so many Hunters that counter him and counter his flashlight, which makes him obsolete. And there's really no reason to ever use Thief when there are so many better kiters in this game. Next in B tier is a survivor that also received a buff recently, which made them a lot better, and that's Embalmer. Embalmer recently received a buff to where he can choose whether to use the coffin or not. So instead of being forced to always use the coffin, even if it's a foot away from the rocket chair and just speeds up your death, now if it's a foot away from the rocket chair, you don't have to use it and you can just get the regular time. And this is also great because when you get saved for the first time and you're by your coffin, you don't use it. But then you get Tie Turner, you run away as far as you can from your coffin with all the speed boost, and then you use it. And that will buy you some more time. That made Embalmer a lot better, but the problem with him still is that he is easy to kill. He's a quick down. A lot you will see in this game is a lot of survivors are bad because they're just too easy to kill, and you really, when you're playing a survivor, they have to be able to kite 70 seconds. Like if you're going to play them, unless they're mechanic, because she's unique, but every other survivor basically has to be able to kite 70 seconds or else they aren't viable. Embalmer has nothing to help his kiting, so you aren't going to get that amount of kiting time, and everything he does, Priestess just does better. So his support element of helping his team by using a coffin, Priestess does it better because she can just use a super portal on Tie Turner and also heal them up. So Embalmer is a decent survivor now, and it made his concept a lot better, but he's never going to be a great survivor because he will never have anything to help his kiting, and that will always be his biggest issue. Next in B tier is Wildling. Wildling is a good survivor. He's actually a pretty good survivor, but Wildling is very dependent on team comp. This is why he's in B tier, because in certain team comps he is A tier, but in other team comps he's just useless, and he also takes a lot of skill to use. Wildling is pretty good if you're using 4 rescuers, because he's another survivor that can make a safe save and that's tough to kill. So he's good in that team comp, and he's also good when he's used in double rescue to Mercenary. His job there is just to be another safe rescuer. The best part about Wildling is that he can make any rescue. So if you die in basement, someone like Coordinator or Ford probably won't be able to make that save. If it's a Feaster or a Spider in basement, they probably won't be able to make the save, and especially not without getting double hit. But Mercenary can, and there's another survivor who can, and that's Wildling. and that's what gives Wildling a place on team comps, is that he's a safe rescuer, and he's also another survivor that you can't kill. So if you find a Wildling first, you have to leave him. People don't realize that, but that's important. That's very big, because that's wasting the hunter's time. That's why double rescue is so good, because you have a 50% chance of finding a survivor you cannot chase. And if you find a survivor you cannot chase 2 straight times, by the time you find the real survivor, the Perfumer or the Priestess or whoever is kiting, all they have to do is a 30-second kite, and it's 3 ciphers. And if they do a regular kite, the game's over. And that's why double rescue is so good, and that's why Wildling is not a bad survivor, because he is not a easy down, and that makes him good. And he's also a safe rescuer, and that really helps when someone dies in basement and you have a survivor that can actually go make that rescue instead of someone who can't. And that's what makes Wildling viable and a good survivor. Lastly, in B tier is Cowboy. Cowboy is a pretty good survivor at what he does. Cowboy is a rescuer to a degree and a support character. He recently received a buff which allows him to now lasso ciphers and pallets. This helps his kiting ability out a lot. Cowboy's biggest weakness is that he's a harasser like Ford and a rescuer, but unlike the other rescuers, he's not able to kite as long as them. So the other harassers are Ford and Wildling, and what makes them so good at harassing is that it's very difficult to kill them, and that it's not too risky to use them because they can easily get away. Cowboy does not have this because he doesn't have a football, he doesn't have a pig, so this makes him fairly easy to down while he's just harassing. So this ability to now lasso pallets and ciphers definitely helps him out a lot. He's a pretty decent survivor, and he's really good at harassing. His decoding debuff is not big at all at negative 10%, so he's a good survivor. The thing is, he's not really good on big maps at all. He works best on smaller maps, which makes him more of a niche survivor. And also, he is still a fairly quick down. He probably will kite 50 to 60 seconds, but in this meta, as a rescuer, you're just better off using a survivor that you know is going to get 3 ciphers than a survivor that can maybe get 3 ciphers, maybe not. They did nerf his speed boost that he receives when he lassos a survivor, which was the best part about Cowboy. So that nerf definitely affected him, but all of it kind of balanced out with his recent buff. One of the other best things about Cowboy is that he has no window reach or pallet reach. What I mean by this is that he cannot get hit after vaulting a window, and he cannot get hit while in the animation of throwing down a pallet. If you have a survivor and you finish vaulting the window, so that means you're still close to the window, and the hunter is pressed against the window on the other side, then you can hit them and it counts as an attack. This is for every survivor. If you're close enough to the window and the hunter is close enough to the window, it counts as a hit. Cowboy, when he is carrying a survivor, this does not work. He has no window reach, so you cannot hit him. Another thing is when you are in the animation of dropping a pallet, you may notice that if a hunter hits you in the middle of that animation, it counts as a hit. Same thing goes for Cowboy. When he is lassoing a survivor, he cannot get hit in this animation. So this really makes him, that's one of the best things about Cowboy in my opinion, which helps out his harassing ability. Okay, let's move on to A- tier. A- tier survivors are very good survivors. They're really viable. It's just that their usage rate in rank and in tournament is lower than what you'll see from the A+ tier and S tier survivors. This is because while these are good survivors, the ones in the higher tiers contribute more to the team than these ones do. So most of these survivors, there's nothing really wrong with them. It's just that there are much better options, or there are better options than using them. First, in A- tier, and by the way, when I'm going through all of these survivors, the first survivor I name in the tier is the worst survivor in that tier. The last survivor I name in that tier is the best one in that tier. And when you see the picture of the tier list, the survivor on the left is the best survivor on that tier, so the closest to the next tier, while the survivor on the right is the worst survivor in that tier. So for A- tier, the first survivor I'm going to name is Postman. Postman is the most recent survivor added to this game. He is a support survivor. Postman is the most pure support survivor in this game. This means that he is the best at supporting, but there are support characters better than him overall. Priestess, Barmaid are also support characters, but they are better than him overall because they can kite better or something else. But Postman's pure support abilities is better because that's all his abilities are focused on, while the other survivors have abilities focused on kiting or on kiting, while Postman really is just all about support. Postman before his buff was a B tier survivor because his buffs didn't do much. Like the mail that you send to other survivors did not do much, and it really didn't impact the game. He really needed the buff that the developers gave him, and this makes him much better at support because now the buffs he gives to survivors actually do make a difference. The biggest issues with Postman is two things. One, it's his kiting ability. Even if you give yourself one of the kiting mails, you are still a fairly easy down. So a 40 to 50 second kite, that's just not long enough in this meta. And also, Postman buffs take too long to get to the survivor. So if a survivor is kiting, you want to give them a kiting buff. It will take 10 to 20 to 30 seconds depending on the distance. But if we go in average distance, then 20 seconds. And by the time the dog gets to that survivor, they're probably already dead. And even if it does get to the survivor while they are kiting, the hunter can just kill the dog. So then it never got to them in the first place. These are the two biggest downsides for Postman. Maybe if they removed the time it took for the survivors to receive the mail, that would make him a lot better of a survivor. But at the end of the day, he'll never be that good just because he's not a great kiter, and that's really what this game is about. His usage rate in rank is fairly low, and in tournament it's nothing. I don't think I've ever seen a Postman, so he's definitely not an amazing survivor, but he's not bad by any means either. He's the closest to being B tier, but he is at the absolute edge of A- tier. Next in A- tier is a survivor that's really kind of stagnated, and that's female Dancer. Dancer has received many buffs. Not really buffs, but they just removed the debuffs that she used to have. This helped her out a lot, and at one point she was pretty close to being S tier and was a solid A tier survivor. The problem with Dancer is, and always has been, the music boxes. For Dancer, she is only a great kiter if the music boxes are out beforehand. However, if you put the music boxes out beforehand and the hunter doesn't chase you, then you just wasted 2 music boxes. But if you wait to put them out because you don't want to waste them, then you can get hit while putting them down, and usually it's just too late to put down the music box. This has always hindered Dancer's ability as a kiter, and her best strategy is just to put down the music boxes before, but of course she's wasting her ability, so that doesn't make her as good as other survivors. Something that has hurt Dancer recently is that the meta hunters really counter her. Bloody Queen hard counters Dancer. Feaster counters her pretty well because he can just hit her with his tentacles. Dream Witch does a good job against Dancer. And Spider and Ripper are both pretty decent against Dancer as well. So she doesn't do a great job of kiting these top hunters, and really that's Dancer's only reason, is that she was a great kiter, so why use her in the first place? She's still a pretty good survivor, but A- tier is where she is for now. If they were to give her a buff, it would be so that she could pick up her music boxes, because then you could use the best strategy, which is putting them down beforehand without it being a waste if the hunter doesn't chase you. Next in A- tier is another survivor that's stagnated and is where they are probably going to be for a while, and that's Coordinator. Coordinator at one point was an S tier survivor. She's gone through some changes, but now she's an A- tier survivor. Coordinator is a decent rescuer, but she's best as a secondary rescuer. She is still one of the better secondary rescuers in this game when you pair her up with a Mercenary or a Forward. Coordinator, at one point after she received her buff, she was pretty close to S tier, and she was really meta. The meta was Cord and Merc on the same team, but then they nerfed her chair persistence because this was too good. Now that her chair persistence has been nerfed, this really showcases her lack of kiting, because before she's never been a great kiter because she only has one thing to help her kiting, which is her flare gun, and she doesn't have anything else. This makes her a pretty lackluster, mediocre kiter, but with so much chair persistence, it was okay if you died in 40 to 50 seconds because your rocket chair time made up for it. Now that persistence is only 10%, the rocket chair time does not make up for it, which means that now her kiting, which has never been good, is just worse now. This leads to many coordinators having to use broken windows instead of tie turner so that they can kite the 60 seconds and get the persistence, while a Mercenary and Mechanic most likely will carry tide. She's still a good survivor, but those are her downsides. That's why she's not really that meta anymore. Her usage rate in rank is okay. Her usage rate in tournament is okay. Next in A- tier is Magician. Magician has always been A tier since the beginning of this game. He's always been A tier. He hasn't received many changes except for one where they just buffed him a bit by making him easier to save off a rocket chair. And there's not much to say about Magician. Magician is a good kiter. He's a good kiter. His debuff is not really that bad. As long as you are a good Mercenary, you'll be able to save Magician fairly easily. And he's a good kiter, but he takes a lot of skill to play. Magician hard counters Feaster, hard counters Clown, counters Ripper, is mediocre against Spider and Geisha, gets destroyed by Bloody Queen and Guard 26, decent against Dream Witch. So Magician is just a good survivor. He's a good kiter. His debuff isn't bad. His usage rate in rank is meh. His usage rate in tournament is fairly decent. He was used in the last IVC and also in the newest tournament happening right now, in the SG tournament. I saw him used a couple of times as well. Lastly, in A- tier, which means the best survivor in A- tier, is Gardner. Gardner has always been a really bad survivor, D tier, C tier type survivor, but the devs buffed her. They gave her a 50-second protective shield, and that alone, that one reason, is why she is an A tier survivor. Any survivor, you give any survivor a 50-second shield to start the game. You make any survivor invincible for 50 seconds. They are going to be good. I really don't know why people think Gardner is not good. In my opinion, it's really common sense. You make a survivor invincible for 50 seconds. In this meta, which I've been talking all about, is doing 3 Cypher Kites, not being a quick 20 to 30 second down, and just being able to last, and you give a survivor with no decoding debuff a 50-second shield, that makes them a good survivor immediately. People say the developers ruined Gardner, and they didn't. They made her a lot more viable, and they made her a lot better of a survivor. But they did ruin her in one aspect, and that's in her breaking chairs. Breaking chairs is indeed useless, and it really doesn't matter anymore. She was stripped away from what made her unique, and is now just a run-of-the-mill kiting character, which I do agree with. They ruined her in that aspect, but in her overall viability and how good she just is, they made her a lot better. Gardner is really good against Dream Witch and Bloody Queen. She counters both of them, and those are the 2 best hunters in the game. Dream Witch depends heavily on that first hit jump scare when you don't have a heartbeat, and then using Blink for the second hit, because Gardner has a protective shield. This counters the jump scare and means you have to get another hit and a Blink hit. So this makes it pretty easy for you to get a 3 Cypher Kite on Dream Witch. Bloody Queen is also really good by getting that snipe mirror as her first hit. Gardner does not take damage, which makes her pretty good against Bloody Queen as well, and allows you to 3 Cypher her. Gardner's usage rate in rank is low, but her usage rate in tournament for the last tournament was high, and in tournament is now decent. A lot of top Chinese teams did use Gardner in the last tournament. Her usage rate will be going down because of some other survivors coming into the fold, but the fact that they used her a lot in tournament just proves that Gardner is a good survivor. Now let's move on to A+ tier. A+ tier survivors are the closest you can be to S tier. These are really, really good survivors. It's just that, and there's really nothing wrong with them, it's just that S tier survivors are so special, they're so good, that they are usually better picks than these ones. But A+ tier survivors are very good at what they do, and these are really viable survivors that you do see in rank a lot, and you do see in tournament a lot. First in A+ tier is Enchantress. Enchantress. She's probably one of the most hated survivors in this game. A lot of people believe she's S tier, which is just wrong. Enchantress' biggest downside is that, believe it or not, she's not a great kiter. She's just not a great kiter, because she has nothing to help her kiting early game. Until she gets hit, or until she kites for 20-30 seconds, she doesn't have anything to help her kiting. And even then, it's just a half a second stun. Enchantress takes a lot of skill to use, because just spamming the stun button will not get you a good kite at all. You will just die in 30-40 seconds by doing that. One of the best parts about Enchantress, though, is her late game. The fact that she can buy time. You need to buy 20 seconds so that the cipher can be done and you can use borrowed time. Enchantress can save games by this, and this really makes her a great survivor. Her kiting ability lacks, and the biggest reason it lacks is because the meta hunters all counter her. Bloody Queen hard counters Enchantress, Dream Witch hard counters Enchantress, Spider does a pretty good job against Enchantress. So because the big three, the S tier hunters all, and Feaster does a good job against Enchantress, all the meta hunters that you will see destroy her for the most part. That's what makes her not an S tier survivor. That's what makes her not a great kiter. A lot about this tier list is not how good of a character they are, it's how they fit into the meta, and that means how the S tier hunters fare against them. As a survivor, you have to be able to win. You need to use survivors that can counter those hunters. If you're facing a clown, there's a gigantic difference for a clown whether he's facing a magician, an enchantress, and prospector, and perfumer, acrobat, those survivors, or if he's facing mechanic. Oh, and priestess also hard counters clown. If he's facing a mechanic and a barmaid, let's say merc officer. Now those two survivors you're facing, you can both kill a mechanic and a barmaid fairly quickly. But if those survivors are magician, enchantress, prospector, priestess, that makes clown a lot worse. That's a big part about this tier list and why some survivors you'll see are lower or higher in the tier list. And as for enchantress, that's why she's a bit lower in this tier list, because the best hunters all counter her. Next, in A+ tier, it's basically the same thing. It's Prospector. Everything I said about Enchantress goes for him. He's great in-game because he can waste those 20 seconds for borrowed time, but he's not so great early game because one magnet is not really that good, and the top hunters counter him. Bloody Queen counters him, Spider hard counters him, Feaster does a good job, Dream Witch does a good job. So basically the same thing I said about Enchantress goes for Prospector, but he's still a good survivor. A+ tier. Next in A+ tier is Acrobat. Acrobat is one of the best pure kiters in this entire game. He starts off with 3 balls early game. That's more than Enchantress and Prospector start off. That's what makes him good, because he starts off with enough tools early game while being able to gain more as he kites. Acrobat's best thing is using the balls through windows, because this gives you no window reach. You can't get hit through windows. Also, you won't get terror shocked. Acrobat does take a lot of skill to use, though. You can't just spam the bombs and expect to get a good kite. You have to know which ones to use when and how to make the hunter fall into them, and all of those tricks makes Acrobat either a great kiter or a mediocre kiter. But the best acrobats, and when you learn him, he turns into one of the best kiters in this entire game. Acrobat is a counter to Spider. He's really good against Spider. He's pretty good against Feaster, Ripper, all the hunters you can name. However, against Bloody Queen, he gets countered hard. That's the biggest counter to Acrobat is Bloody Queen. In Dream Witch, he is okay. He's just decent against Dream Witch. One of the hidden secrets about Acrobat is how good of a rescuer he is, and it can come in handy. If you're facing a guard 26 that's camping, it's almost impossible to save off of a good guard 26 for most survivors. But Acrobat is actually one of the survivors that can save off of him, because if you put a red ball, no more bombs, and you can make the save. So Acrobat's rescue ability, and when he rescues, he gets a slow ball, and then you can put a slow ball on the hunter, and if you put 2, it's basically a flare gun like Coordinator. That's why a lot of acrobats use tie turner. They go tie turner, borrow time, and then pallet speed boost. Acrobat is one of the best kiters in this game, and his rescuing ability is pretty underrated. He is definitely a great survivor, and in Moonlit, he's an S tier survivor, because Moonlit, he is absolutely insane and is one of the top 3 survivors in the game in that map. Next in A+ tier is Barmaid. Barmaid is a support character, and she is one of the best support characters in this entire game. Barmaid's kiting is okay. She's a decent kiter. Great thing about Barmaid, she's a good kiter, but Blink exists. If Blink didn't exist, she would be an amazing kiter. But because Blink does exist, she's just a good kiter. If you get hit early enough and then you use your wine and the hunter does not have Blink back up, you will get healed back up, and now you're fully healed. So now you can get your 3 cipher kite that way. So Barmaid can usually do 3 cipher kites, and if it's a hunter that doesn't bring Blink, you can get longer than 3 ciphers. If a Barmaid has a Seer, she becomes S tier, because it's a guaranteed free heal up. Barmaid's kiting is fairly good, and her support is amazing. She really goes well with Mercenary because Mercenary has a long healing time, but she counteracts that by just giving him the wine and not wasting any time on the heal, and Mercenary can go back to save. For hunters, a lot of the game that determines a tie, whether you tie or you win, is if you can snowball the game, which if people are hurt, if you can capitalize that on that in that moment and down them, if you can keep the pressure on the survivors. Barmaid really helps against this because when every survivor could be one hit and you have one hit survivors, which makes it much easier to get that second kill and win. Barmaid's healing them up. She's keeping everyone healed. She's keeping everyone able to make the next rescue, which can mean the difference between tying a game or winning a game. Or for survivors, it can mean the difference between tying a game and losing a game. Her usage rate in rank is okay. It's an okay usage rate, and her usage rate in tournament is fairly high. In the last tournament, her usage rate was really high, and so far in this tournament, it's been a bit lower. But her usage rate in tournament is pretty high. She is a great survivor on voice chat because the survivors that need healing the most can know immediately where you are, get the healing, and you can strategize a lot with Barmaid, which makes her a great voice chat survivor. The last survivor in A+ tier is First Officer. First Officer is a rescuer, and he's one of the best rescuers in the game. There's not too much to say about Officer because he's really a prototypical rescuing survivor. He can rescue off of any hunter, probably with the exception of Guard 26, but any other hunter he can rescue off of safely. You have no risk of going down. He buys time. He's a great kiter because you just use your two wands, your two watches, and that's 40 seconds. And if you just can actually kite by yourself 30 seconds, that's a 3-cipher kite. So he's a free 3-cipher kite without taking any type of skill. Officer is one of those no skill survivors. It takes 0 skill to use Officer because all you do is click a button and then run straight and the hunter can't hit you. So it makes him a really popular pick because of how easy he is to learn and use. He's easy to rescue with because your movement is delayed, so it's tough for the hunter to hit you. He hard counters Ripper. And you can rescue off of any hunter. It's just Ripper. He really hard counters. It's really all there is to say about Officer. The reason he is A+ tier instead of S tier is because the two rescuers in S tier are better because they impact a game more than Officer. If your team is doing good and on pace to win, Officer isn't going to ruin that. You're going to win. But if your team is on pace to tie or lose, Officer isn't going to change that either. You're just going to tie or lose because he can't do anything besides just keeping the flow of the game the same. But a lot of times with good survivors, that's all you need is to keep the flow of the game the same. So that's why Officer is a really good survivor. He's pretty close to being S tier, but he isn't. His usage rate in rank is really high in this server, but his usage rate in rank in other servers is decent. In China it's decent. His usage rate in tournament is also decent. He's used, of course, in 4 rescuers, but Officer is mostly used as a secondary rescuer to Mercenary. But in tournaments, you see Ford a lot more than Officer. So Officer has a good usage rate in rank and tournament. Let's move on to S tier survivors. S tier survivors are the best survivors in the game. These survivors provide something that cannot be found anywhere else by any other survivor, and they do their job better than any other survivor in their category. These are the most popular picks in rank and in tournament. And these are the survivors that are the most annoying to face as well. First in S tier is Perfumer. Perfumer has been S tier forever, ever since she came out. She is a great kiter and a good rescuer. The fact that you can take a hit and then perfume it back, and that means no damage was taken, is obviously good. Her rescuing is really good as well, because you just perfume, get hit, perfume, get hit, save, perfume back, no damage. Perfumer is one of the most popular picks because of how easy she is just to fit into any team comp. There's no team comp Perfumer doesn't fit in, and she's really versatile that way. The most popular teams you will see is Double Rescue, Merc Forward, Mechanic, and then a Perfumer / Priestess. And before Priestess really got buffed, it was Perfumer for short, and now it's Perfumer / Priestess. And if Mech's banned, then it'll be Perfumer and Priestess. That's all I have to say about Perfumer. She's just an amazing survivor, and in her category of kiting, she is the best kiting character in the game. So she doesn't kite the best, but out of the kiter characters, she's the best. Next in S tier is a survivor that recently received a nerf / buff, and that's Ford. Ford got his football duration nerfed by a good 30%. So when you think about that, you would think Ford would have fallen down to probably A tier. But he also received a sensitivity buff, which allows you to now not miss stuns. You aren't going to miss stuns anymore. So yes, his football is lower by 30%, but if that means you're going to actually stun the hunter every time, it makes him a better survivor. Ford has always been a top tier survivor, and in China he's always been the most popular pick of any rescuer. Ford is a great survivor when he's paired up with Mercenary. He's the most popular secondary rescuer to Mercenary, more popular than Officer and Coordinator. He's also a popular pick in 4 rescuers. What makes Ford better than Officer? Because a lot of people may not see, like, okay, that's a big discussion. Who's better, Officer or Ford? Ford is better even though he decodes slower, because he can impact the game more. What did I say about Officer? Officer is a great survivor, but he doesn't impact the game. He keeps the flow of the game the same, so if your team's doing well, you win. If it's not, you lose. Ford can actually change this. If your team is doing well, you're still going to win, because as long as the Ford doesn't just throw the game and die and miss all his stuns, you still win. But what about if your team's not doing well, or if your team is on pace to get a tie? Ford can change this, and he can win you games. If someone dies, if a mechanic dies in 20 seconds, you may think you're going to lose or tie. If Ford does a great job of stunning and wastes another 20 to 30 seconds, that's the difference between losing that game and winning that game. No other rescuer really provides that, because the other rescuers don't do this as well as Ford. Wildling and Cowboy do not harass as well as Ford harasses. His usage rate in rank is pretty high, and his usage rate in tournament is very, very high. He's used so much, he even gets banned in tournament a lot. And when you need those clutch stuns to win you the game, Ford can make them, and he can win you games. Ford is a great survivor, and that's why he is in S tier. One of the biggest jumps from last tier list to this tier list is Priestess. Priestess is now a S tier survivor, and I believe she was a B tier survivor the last time. She did receive buffs to make it faster for her to put down portals, while also receiving some nerfs to her vertical portals when she goes from a higher floor to a second floor. Priestess is so game changing. So game changing. Her and Mechanic are probably the two most game changing survivors in this game. They have the biggest impact to your team in the game. They can carry your team. Priestess is a support character, but her kiting is amazing. She's one of the best kiters in this game. Her kiting is amazing. She is going to kite 3 ciphers. She decodes fast. She's a great rescuer. And she's an amazing support. When you use the super portal saves games. If your team dies quickly and you super portal on tie turner, you just turn a loss to a win. As long as your team doesn't, of course, throw the game again, you turn the game around from a loss to a win. You turn the game around from a tie to a win. If you use super portal before and someone's kiting and they're about to die and they run to that super portal and get healed up, you turn the game to a win. Priestess support is amazing. Her kiting is great and her rescuing is good. She's such an all-around good survivor. And she's the main reason Hunters struggle so much. So Hunters win rates now have really fallen to 40 to 50% Hunter win rates, while Survivor win rates have risen to 60-65%. A lot of this has to do with Priestess because of her reoccurrence into the meta after she was out of it for a good couple of seasons. Now that she's back into the meta, it makes Survivor so much better. Her usage rate in rank is extremely high. In China, the most knowledge points for any character is Priestess with over 15,000 knowledge points as Priestess, and no one else is even close to that. And her usage rate in tournament is very high. She's used in every team. The most popular team comp is Merc, Ford, Mechanic, and Priestess. She's so good. No one ever thought you'd be able to actually over-trump Perfumer in that spot. And she did it. She is used more than Perfumer in rank and tournament. And that just shows how good of a survivor Priestess really is. She's pretty toxic to face. Her ban rate is even pretty high in tournaments. She's usually, a lot of teams ban Priestess second after Seer. They ban her before Mechanic now. So Priestess is a really good survivor. And I would like if they nerfed her, because then I could play Hunter in peace again. Next in S tier is the best rescuer in the game, and he's been the best rescuer for a very long time now, and that is Mercenary. Mercenary is still the best rescuer in this game because everything you want a rescuer to be, Mercenary does. He makes the first save with no risk. You aren't going to get stuffed on the save. He's a great kiter, so you can't kill him quick. You have to leave the Mercenary because he has 5 elbow pads and he's too good of a kiter. His rocket chair persistence is super long, so even if you did kill Merc, it didn't matter because his chair persistence more than makes up for it. His decoding is not too slow like a Wildling or even as slow as a Ford. It's a good amount and a manageable amount for most teams. And the only downside to Mercenary is his healing, and his healing is not really that bad in most cases, unless you're facing like a clown who puts a modified drill on you. The healing doesn't really matter. Another great thing about Merc is that he can save games because he can make the second save. A lot of the time survivors can't waste time leaving their cipher and going for the save. They need to keep decoding to keep the speed up, And now Mercenary, instead of having to send a new survivor and wasting that time, Mercenary goes. He makes the save, and then you win the game because the cipher is now primed and you can use borrowed time. Mercenary also comes in clutch when every survivor is injured and you need to make that save. The cipher could be primed. The cipher is primed, but every survivor is injured. If you're facing a Ripper or an Axe Boar or something, they're going to hit you with their secondary attack, and then cipher pops, get hit again, you lose. But a Mercenary, even if he's one hit, he can make the save, and that will save a lot of games. Mercenary is an amazing survivor. He is the best rescuer in the game. Now let's get into the big two. These have been the big two for a long time as well. And while I do have one survivor over the other, it's not really they are over. These are the same tier. They are the same tier survivor. They're just as good as each other. First is Seer. Seer is a support character and a kiter. Seer gives an owl that can take a hit. That's why Seer is S tier. Because he makes any survivor in the game 3 hit. Or he makes any survivor in the game a rescuer. Because you can, if you have an owl, there's no fear in rescuing. Those two things make Seer S tier. But what really makes Seer great is not himself. Because his kiting is not too good. What makes Seer great is how well he is with other survivors, how well he correlates with other survivors. A Perfumer, you add a Seer to a Perfumer, and that makes her insanely hard to kill in a guaranteed 3 cipher kite. Because if you get your Perfume baited out, if a Ripper hits you with a Foggy Blade on Perfume, something like that, and then you Perfume back and you're about to get hit again, a Seer puts Owl on you, and now you can use your next 2 Perfumes at full health. Barmaid, if a Barmaid uses Wine and she's about to get hit, all you have to do is put the Owl, and this makes Barmaid a guaranteed 3 cipher kite because she gets a free heal up. Because of how well Seer, how much better Seer makes these 2 survivors that are both meta survivors, is what really makes Seer so good, and is why he is the most popular ban pick in tournament. He's a great voice chat survivor because you can tell the Seer on your team when you need an owl at the right time, so he doesn't waste the owl, so he's not wasting time spectating you instead of decoding. I think everyone who's watching this video basically already knew and knows now why Seer is an S tier survivor. His usage rate, of course, in rank and tournament is every single match. Every single match you can use Seer in rank, he gets used. Every single match you can use Seer in tournament, he gets used. His ban rate is the highest ban rate in tournament, and in rank it's tied for highest with the next survivor. And the next survivor is Mechanic. Mechanic is a great survivor because she makes a 4v1 into a 5v1, and just adding another survivor to your team for the hunter obviously means that she's going to be a great survivor. Her decoding is amazing, and her biggest downside is, of course, her kiting ability. But the thing with Mechanic that makes her so much better than a survivor like Mind's Eye is that even if Mechanic dies quickly in 20 to 30 seconds, as long as you have your bot out, you're still going to tie the game or win the game. It doesn't matter because you're still decoding on chair. So it's like you never even died because someone's still decoding a cipher. You still have the same amount. If a survivor like Mind's Eye dies, she's useless. If she's on chair, she's useless because her decoding speed is not being used. While with Mechanic, if she's on chair, she's just as useful. Mechanic's rescuing is what really tips the scales for her and what makes her one of the top 2 survivors in this game, because she can be decoding at the same time she's rescuing. This keeps the cipher rush up and makes it just insane for the hunter to have to deal with while she's still saving, body blocking, tide turner, wasting time, but you're decoding as well. Mechanic is probably the most game-changing survivor in this entire game because of her decoding speed and adding another survivor into the game. Her usage rate in Rink is extremely high. Anytime she's not banned, you see her. Same goes for tournament for the most part. Anytime mechanic is not banned, you see her. Her ban rate in Rink is very high. It's tied for number 1 with Seer, and her ban rate in tournament is also pretty high. It's number 2, tied for number 2 right now with Priestess, but has historically always been top 1, top 2 ban rate. So mechanic is, in my opinion, the best survivor in this entire game, but without a doubt, S tier survivor. That does it for the tier list. I do hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you learned from it. If you did enjoy this video, please leave a like. And if you have any questions or concerns, or you just want to talk, you can leave in the comments below. And if you want to see more videos like this in the future, please subscribe to the channel. And that'll be all for the video. Bye.